Hey everybody, Leah Klett here with the Christian Post, and I'm so excited today to be joined by best-selling author and podcast host Andrew Klavan. We're talking about his brand new book, The Kingdom of Cain: Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. You've long explored crime in fiction, but in The Kingdom of Cain, you really go deeper. So tell me why you wanted to center this book around three murders, especially the first in human history, which is the story of Cain and Abel, of course. So take me back to what inspired this book.
Well, there's two things. One is I write crime stories. That's what I do for a living, and I've done it my whole life. And once it became known that I was a Christian, I started to get these letters, which I still get all the time, that start out, you call yourself a Christian, but you write about these horrible things. And I always think, well, yes, this is what I see in the world, and this is what I see, kind of causes the drama in the world of these things that are evil that people do, and the ways that good people confront that evil have always been the core to me of storytelling. And so there was that on the one hand, and then on the other hand is the fact that I think modern Christian art is really very bland. And I have nothing against family friendly art. I have nothing against faithful upbeat art. But if that's all you ever watch, I think you're not prepared for the world as it is. And one of the things that the arts do is that they fill your heart with all the experiences of humankind so that when you confront them in real life, you're kind of prepared for them and you've seen them already. And so I decided to take murders that had not inspired not just one work of art, but had repeatedly come into artists' minds to inspire novels and movies and poetry. And even at one point, one of the murderer's hands was mummified and put in a museum as a display. I mean, just people wanted to come and look at this guy's hand. And I thought, why are these particular murders so attractive to the imagination? What do they do? What do they tell us? What do artists how do artists enlighten us when they reproduce this darkness, this evil, and make it something beautiful? Because the arts can be beautiful even when they talk about the darkest things. And I think that that was what I was trying to get at. And the reason that's important to me is because transforming darkness into light is, I sort of think, what God does. I think there's so much wickedness in the world, so much darkness in the world, and God doesn't take it away. He doesn't take your sufferings away. He doesn't take the bad things that happen to you away, but he does make good of things. And I think that that's what artists try to do too. And I was just looking for the connection between those two things.
Yeah, talk about that subtitle, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness, because that does sound kind of paradoxical, right?
Right.
How can true crime really help us see divine truth in these tragic stories, right? We're not just ending there.
Well, how is it that when you see a work of art that is about something really dark, it can still move you and uplift you? How is it when even if the hero dies in the end, even if it has a sad ending, you don't come out of a movie saying, oh, I'm going to mourn for the rest of my life because the heroine died. You come out saying that was a beautiful work of art. And so I wanted to find out, I wanted to think about the fact that I try to make my books beautiful. Sometimes they have unhappy endings. They always have tragedy in them. They always have darkness and even evil in them. So I wanted to get at that, what it is that these murders did. And so the murders that I chose were, as you say, Cain killing Abel. There's a murder by a guy named Ed Gein in the 1950s America that inspired an entire genre of movie making. And then there's a murder by, it's kind of two murders put together, really. There's a murder that inspired Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, which is one of the greatest novels by a Christian, ever written by a Christian, maybe the greatest novel. And then his work inspired the work of the philosopher Nietzsche, and Nietzsche inspired another murder. And so I wanted to find out what it was, how these things became beautiful. And what I started to find was that because every murder is an act of evil, you can always find out how somebody detached himself from God by studying that murder. And that's almost what you see in every single one of these works of art. You see somebody detaching himself from God and the results of that, and sometimes the path back. When I was 19 years old, I was an agnostic. I was an agnostic most of my life, and I was a practicing atheist. And I was in college at a time when what they started to teach was that morality was relative. That you may think that one thing is good, but another culture thinks another thing is good, and all cultures are equally good, and so therefore to beat up a woman because she's been sexually assaulted is just as good as to treat women with respect and elevate them and think that they are half of the world. And I thought, like, that's kind of a strange theory, but this is what my professors are saying. And then one day I read this very, very dark novel called Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky about an axe murderer. And I was reading the story, and he commits this horrifying murder where he kills two women with an axe. And I remember sitting there at 19 years old and thinking, no, there's no planet on which this cannot be evil. That I don't care if you're on the planet of axe murderers, and all of them think that axe murderer is great. It's still evil. And once I saw that, I didn't know it, but I was forced onto the road toward God and toward faith. And so this moment of a scene that's horrific and yet so beautifully written that what you see is the absolute pity of these women, of the absolute sanctity of their lives, the sanctity of another life that this guy has separated himself from. And the most beautiful moment in the novel is this guy has a friend who's a prostitute. This axe murderer has a friend who's a prostitute. And I always laugh and think, if I went into a Christian bookstore today and said, could you give me the novel about the axe murderer and the prostitute? They would like kick me out into the street. And yet there's this scene where he goes to her and he confesses his crime. And she says, what have you done to yourself? And I remember reading that, and my eyes just filled with tears, because she recognizes that not only has he destroyed a life, but these lives are in God's hands. They're not going to be forgotten. He's detached his soul from God. He's detached his soul from its own source, and essentially ruined what this beautiful thing that he was given, this beautiful personality. That to me is so illuminating and so brilliant that I would not have missed that moment for the world. And it's only in studying the darkness, I think, that you find this greater design. If all you look at is the good, if all you ever think about is the happy things that happen in life, and every time something bad happens, you think, well, God will take care of it, and all things turn to the good to those who love God and so forth. I don't think you can see just how beautiful and complex the design of the world is. And if you can't see that, I don't think you can actually understand what's happening.
Is there a place for mainstream horror, say Stephen King, in the life of a Christian? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think there absolutely is. I think that, I deal with certain horror films. I mean, I think if you take Psycho, that's a horror film. I think if you take Silence of the Lambs, that's a horror film. And both of those were inspired by the Ed Gein murder. There's even a murder, a much more graphic and difficult horror film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is also quite a good film and inspired by this. Now, look, I'm not saying you have to look at things that are going to ruin your life. If you're going to have nightmares, if it's going to, absolutely destroy you or something like that, you shouldn't look at them. There are plenty of movies I won't watch because I just don't want the images in my head, because they're too graphic or something like this. But these are movies that are of extreme beauty. The movie Psycho is of extreme beauty. And there are other horror films, one I saw recently or a few years ago, called A Quiet Place, which I thought was the last really good film I've seen, which is terrifying. I mean, I watched this thing with my body like twisted up because I hardly wanted to look at it. And yet I came away impressed with the beauty of it. It has a scene in it, just for instance, of a woman giving birth while monsters inhabit her house looking for her. That's one of the most frightening scenes I've ever seen. And yet you come away with such an idea of the beauty of motherhood and what it means to create and to bring a child into this world of death and horror, and why that's such a heroic thing to do and why it's such a beautiful thing to do, that I wouldn't have missed it for the world, and the experience of being frightened. Look, you're frightened, but you're not in danger. No monster is going to come into the movie theater and eat you. It's only happening on the screen. And that's one of the beautiful things about the art. About the arts is they give you experiences without putting you in danger. So yeah, I think that anything that is done truthfully
Mhm.
is going to speak about God. And this is the other thing. I don't think God is a sideline. I don't think religion is a sideline. It's something you do on Sunday. It's something you talk about when you're talking about these things, but then later on you can watch something else and you think, well, this is not a God movie, so it's okay if it has all this horror in it. I don't believe that. I believe that anything that's true is going to speak of God. And so there's many great works that have inspired me. There's even one evil work I can think of that has inspired me toward God because they told the truth, uh,
Mm.
because they showed life as it truly is.
So you're saying that sort of the responsibility of the artist is to seek truth in whatever they're creating, whatever it is.
That's right. That's right. Because if you lie, if you tell people that everything's going to, this is my problem with modern Christian art. And Christian art at its height was not like this at all. But my problem with modern Christian art is that it's not true. It's
Mm.
not true that if you pray, you're going to always get your what you pray for. It's not true that if you believe in God, your death is not going to cause grief, and you're not going to be afraid of death. You're still going to be afraid of death. Everybody, you should be afraid of death. That's bad. That's a bad thing. That's why we look for eternal life because death is bad. Um, if you portray the world like that, it's just like the thing I always compare it to is romantic comedies. I have nothing against romantic comedies. I have nothing against family-friendly religious works. But if a woman looks at romantic comedies and thinks that's what love is like, she's going to be very disappointed when she finds herself in an actual meaningful relationship. She's going to find that it's actually nothing like that. And I think the same thing is true of Christian art that shows us the world where every sinner gets punished and every believer gets rewarded and everything turns out good in the end. You're going to be very disappointed when you see what life is really like. The God I believe in is the God of this world, the God of this sad, broken, sometimes dark, oftentimes evil world. That's where I believe in God, and I'm not fragile about that. I mean, my faith has not made me more fragile. It's made me stronger. It has not made me breakable. It has made me indestructible. And so I'm not afraid to confront art. And if I can give you this one example of like an actual work of evil that transformed me, I went through a period in my 30s when I became a complete atheist. I ditched agnosticism. I just don't believe. And I started to read atheist philosophers. And my problem with them was none of them could make sense of morality. I knew there was a moral world. I knew that some things are bad and some things are good. I knew there was no talking, you couldn't talk me out of that. And yet I couldn't find an atheist who had any explanation of that. And then I read the Marquis de Sade, who is where we get the word sadism from. And the Marquis de Sade was an actual psychopath who wrote brilliant philosophy mixed in with sadistic pornography. And I read him because he was an atheist, and I was reading this, and he said, look, there's no God. If there's no God, there's no morality. If there's no morality, you should do as you please. If you do as you please, you will find that strong people abuse weak people for their pleasure. And I thought, gee, that actually makes sense. That's the only atheist I've ever read who makes sense. But it was so obviously a picture of hell that I was repelled by it. And I thought I abandoned my atheism almost on the spot. I thought if that's the road that atheism leads down, I'm going home by another way. I'm not taking that road. And so just because he was honest, even though he was evil, he was actually evil, not just an evil writer. Because he was honest, he actually illuminated his own sickness so that it showed me the way home. That's a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful. But you think critically about things. I don't know that the average consumer of art today has that kind of ability.
Yes, and that's another reason why I write books like this. I mean, another reason I write books like this is to show people what they're looking at. I mean, I think that if you go to a movie that has horror in it in order to be titillated by the horror, art is a two-way street. Art is a relationship between the creator and the person consuming his creation. And so if a lot of people say to me like, can video games be art? And I think, yes, I've seen video games that are art, but if you sit in your room for 6 hours, smoking dope and playing a video game, then it's not art because you're not confronting it as art. So I think that art does take a little bit of practice, if you're going to get past superhero movies and kind of the dumbest art. Yeah, you should kind of learn something about what you're looking at. And yeah, I agree with you. I think that there are people, I mean, I've been in movies that I thought were really good in neighborhoods that were really bad, and people would cheer if a woman got killed or got beaten up. And I thought, like, well, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing something totally different. And so, yeah, art is a two-way street, no question.
Has your approach to writing changed since becoming a Christian? Because you became a Christian later on in life. Tell me a little bit about that.
When I realized I was becoming a Christian, I actually prayed to God, oh, please, God, don't turn me into a Christian novelist, because I thought that Christian novels were so bad, and so I don't know, light and cheerful and unrealistic. And I was writing very dark, stories about, bad guys and good guys and the things that really happen in the world. And and in fact, something really strange happened that I talk about in the Kingdom of Cain is that my actual outlook became darker. once I realized that there was such a thing as sin and what sin looked like in comparison to God, the world looked to me much, much darker than it had even before when I was fairly cynical. Um, but at the same time, my view of life got darker. My heart had grown more serene and more joyful. And as I say in the book, I know this to be true because my wife told me it was true. You know, she said, "You've totally changed. You're like a much more serene, joyful person." And I thought, well, that really is strange, and I want to capture some of that in my work. So I think that the thing that has happened to my work is that it hasn't gotten any more bright or happy or stupid. I hope, but it now does take place in an in a moral atmosphere that I think makes it more uplifting even in its darkest moments. I think my work has become much better, to be honest with you, and I think that I think I'm a really good writer, but I think it went beyond that when I began to put it in this kind of greater context. You find Christians in my work, but you don't find any Christianity. You just find people living their lives, and yet I think it informs everything I write.
What do you hope readers walk away with after reading The Kingdom of Cain?
I hope they walk away, first of all, with less of a feeling that their faith is fragile and that that if they see certain things, it's going to shatter. But I really hope they walk away with something that happens at the end of the book, the way the book ends. The book ends confronting a famous sculpture called the Pietà by Michelangelo, which is a sculpture of Mary holding the dead body of her son, Jesus Christ. And it is the most beautiful sculpture I've ever seen. And I've seen all the beautiful sculpture. I've been around the world. I've seen all kinds of things. It is the most beautiful sculpture I've ever seen. And you look at it, and anybody who confronts it, it's in the Vatican, anybody who sees it is stunned by its beauty. But what's it a picture of? It's a picture of the saddest thing that can possibly happen to a human being, a mother losing her child. Nothing sadder happens in life than that. And it's even worse because it's the world losing its God, crucifying its God because they don't recognize him when they're face to face with him. So it's not only a sad, tragic moment; it's an absolute cosmic disaster. And yet Michelangelo, a mere man, took this marble and made it into something beautiful. And the question that I ask at the end of this book is if a mere man can take this great tragedy and turn it into something beautiful, what can God not do with this dark, tragic world in the marble of eternity? And I think that beauty is, in fact, the answer to the question, how can there be a good God and he allows so much evil? I don't think it's a theological answer like, well, there had to be free will and therefore there has to be evil. Maybe that's true or not, but it doesn't really help you in the moment of suffering. I think that the idea that we are part of something beautiful that we can't quite see because we're looking at it through a glass darkly, I think that idea is what uplifts me. And it is what I remember all the time. There can't be the beauty of the resurrection and salvation if there's not the darkness of the fall. There cannot be the beauty of salvation if there's not the darkness of this world and the journey of this world. We are part of a design of incomprehensible beauty. And I think every great work of art reminds us of that and reminds us that even the darkness is going to point the way to the light.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more Christ-centered journalism.